All right. Welcome everyone to this evening's culminating One Book Belgrade virtual tie-in event, proudly brought to you by the Belgrade Community Library. One Book Belgrade presentations are free and open to the public thanks to a generous sponsorship by Kenyon Noble Lumber and Hardware. If you have questions about other One Book Belgrade events, of which this is the final one, but we do have recordings of the previous ones that will be available soon, or if you have questions about our adult winter reading program, let me know. Attendees to this presentation will be entered to win one of our many winter reading prizes, including gift certificates and book packs from Country Bookshelf, local Belgrade restaurant gift cards, 2 fly fishing trip options from Gallatin River Guides, and the fly that you are about to watch be tied, courtesy of Keith McCafferty. The drawing for these prizes will be on April 1st. My name is Sarah Creech, and I am the Adult Services Librarian here at the Belgrade Library. Before I introduce our presenter, a few tips and announcements. Attendee videos and microphones are both disabled for this presentation. We would love to take any questions you have for our guest using the Q&A function, the chat, or the raise hand feature. All 3 of those should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have a question you'd like to ask using your voice and your microphone, click the raise hand button. And at the next opportunity, I'll allow you to speak and you can turn your microphone on. Or as we're chatting, you can ask your question over the chat or Q&A, and I'll pull questions as we go through the evening. And let's see, to use the chat, click the speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. And if there's not a toolbar visible, press your Alt key once and it should show up. The chat will open on the right side of your screen if you're not in full screen mode. If you are in full screen mode, it will appear in a window you can move around your screen by clicking and dragging. And where you see the message, type message here, that's where you want to click and type your message and then press enter or return to send it. Similar idea with the Q&A, you can click the Q&A and I think it has an option for you to ask a question or see the answered questions. And similar idea, you would type your question and then press enter or return. And I'll monitor both the chat and the Q&A, and I'll watch for raised hands. All right, so this event is being recorded for the library's YouTube channel, and our local radio station, KGVM, is recording for future broadcasting and archiving, and we're glad to have them here. Closed captions are available for this talk if you'd like to see them. To show them, that's going to be that 4th button on the bottom of your toolbar that says CC. You should be able to click that or the arrow right next to it and say show subtitles. And finally, just please, if you don't mind, take a minute at the end of the event. When I close out the event, a survey should pop up in one of your browsers, and it'll help us and the sponsors know what programs bring the most interest. And since we can't see your faces today, it also helps us know if you enjoyed the event. So I am going to let our presenter introduce himself, but I just want to say I met him. We were just talking about this 2 years ago at the event the library hosted with other contributors to the book Bozeman from the Heart. And we got to talking and mentioned we wanted to eventually start a community read. And this is our 2nd annual community read. And we're thrilled to have him here. So please help me welcome silently, albeit, Keith McCafferty. Thanks for being here, Keith.
Well, thank you all for coming. And I want to thank Sarah and Gail and Casey and other people at the Belgrade Library for inviting me to join in. It's an honor to be chosen for One Book Belgrade. It was for my first book, The Royal Wulff Murders. As Sarah mentioned, I'm going to tie a fly a little bit later on because it's really hard to do 2 things at once for me. And the fly will be presented in sort of a globe like that, but with a little brass nameplate saying what it is. And it's not as pretty as some of my flies. here's a bunch of little mice. These are going to be fished in Alaska this summer. So anyway, we'll get back to the fly. I've tried doing the fly while I'm answering questions, and it gets sort of awkward. I write the Sean Stranahan series of novels for Penguin Books. And my books, for those of you who don't know, are largely set in the Madison River Valley. When I started out, I toyed with the idea of setting my books in a big lost county in eastern Montana, sort of the way C.J. Box and Craig Johnson and Margaret Cole have done with these big wide open places in Wyoming. But then I realized, you know, Bozeman here, this valley, has changed a great deal. And what used to be all private ranches have been subdivided, and you now have people of all stripes of life, you know, living cheek by jowl in a way. You can have a marijuana distributor living next door to a state senator, living next door to a trout guide, living next door to whoever. And I thought that that was an interesting dynamic to pursue. And also because of the way the economy's been structured, that we are sort of gradually moving away from agribusiness and extractive industry in favor of tourism and recreation. And as I like to say, that, you know, the gears of Montana, or especially the Madison Valley, run on trout slime. So I'll tell you just a little bit of how I got started. From a very early age, around the age of 4, I became fascinated by snakes. I grew up in Appalachia, where people held the most ridiculous superstitions about snakes, including my grandmother, who, whenever she would come to the house, she knew I had snakes, so she would stuff towels in the cracks of the doors, you know. And she'd say, well, honey child, you know, I've seen that hoop snake roll down the hill and strike a man dead. Or I've seen that milk snakes, you know, suck the breath out of a baby. It's like, well, what do you say to that? So I realized at an age when most children think parents and adults know everything, that in fact they don't. And that the only way that I could really learn about snakes was to learn how to read. And so with my mother's help, I learned how to read when I was 4 years old. And so by the time I went to kindergarten, I could not only recite the names of all 120 or some species of snakes, I could recite their names in Latin. And so when I was bored in church, sitting there in the pew and tapping my foot, you know, I would say under my breath, I would just start reciting in Latin all the names of the snakes. And people would look at me, and there were many times when I was not allowed, periods when I was not allowed to play with some children because their parents thought that I, you know, was dancing with the devil somehow. They didn't know it was Latin. They thought I was speaking in tongues. So for me, at that very young age, becoming interested in snakes was a way of like searching for the truth. And later, a few years later, my mother got me the complete Sherlock Holmes, which was so heavy, it put a dent in my chest. And, but that also, you know, was a search for the truth. Holmes was searching for the truth. And later, the same dynamic played out with another writer whose name was Jim Corbett, who hunted down man-eating tigers in India back in the early 20th century. And my dad would tell me stories, but I'd never seen the books. But one time when we went to the Rocky Mountain National Park to go camping, I'd never seen mountains. Our car broke down, we had to be towed into Denver. And while the car was getting a rebuilt motor dropped in it, I went to the public library and found a book of Jim Corbett's, And I only had time to read one story, so I read the longest one. And it's very true. I walked up the stairs of the library wanting to lead a life of adventure. And I walked down those steps 2 hours later. So not only wanting to lead a life of adventure, but to write about it. So I really knew I wanted to be a writer at an early age. And I also knew the writer I wanted to be. I wanted to be Al McLean, A.J. McLean, who was the fishing editor of Field and Stream magazine. My plan was to meet the great Al McLean, to impress him somehow, to marry his daughter, who was a beautiful young woman, and to take his place as the fishing editor of Field and Stream. I thought, well, how can I impress the great Al McLean? Well, he could do one thing that very few fishermen can do. He could take a 90-foot fly line and cast the whole length of it without a rod, just with his bare hands. And I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. So I learned how to do that. My father gave me an old 8.5-foot fiberglass rod, and you practice until you can cast the whole line, and then you lop a foot off. And you just keep lopping a foot off until you have casting the whole length of the line with a 1-foot fly rod. And then you can just throw the fly rod away. And I learned how to do that all winter long. And I was supposed to meet Al McLean because at that point I was a contributor to Field and Stream. I was sort of an up and coming writer, and people knew he was my hero. And so they arranged a meeting with us on the Madison River. And unfortunately, he died. And I never got a chance to meet him or go fishing with him or to marry his daughter or to take his job at Field and Stream. But I will always tell people, but I came close. I just wrote a story for Field and Stream today. I've probably written about 1,500 articles. That's a lot of articles. And it used to be that if I wrote more than one or two for an issue, the third one or the second one would have to be written under a pseudonym. So it didn't look like I was writing the whole magazine. And the first time I had to pick a pseudonym, I actually was in graduate school at the University of Michigan, and I had to enter a writing contest, and the judges wanted to be impartial. So I chose the name Sean Stranahan, which is the name of my character for my books. So it became very easy to pick a name. And I entered a writing contest with that under that name, and I won. And my prize was I got to drive upstate in Michigan to meet this guy, and he was going to take me hunting for snowshoe rabbits on snowshoes with a basset hound. And that was my prize. It was my first literary prize. And many years later, in fact, just a few years ago, I was fortunate enough to win the Western Writers of America Spur Award for Best Novel for Crazy Mountain Kiss. And they had, these sort of big time people there, and I had to give a little talk. I thought, well, what am I going to say to these people? And I realized, well, I'll tell them the Basset Hound story and tell them what, the Spur Award is only the second most prestigious award that I have won. So I became a Field and Stream writer, and I like to say that it was like flying around the world on a broom, but the fly rod was my broom. I traveled all over. I'm writing about traveling to India right now. And they decided they wanted to make me into the survival editor. So I always say, before there was Bear Grylls, there was me. I was the person who was dropped off on the top of a mountain in December and would have 3 nights to walk out, basically wearing clothes like I am now. And people always ask, well, how did you become a novelist? Well, what happened was Field and Stream had sent me on a 3-night survival trip. The first night I could bury in pine needles and dirt underneath a spruce tree And if I could survive, then the second night, I could use a 6-foot square tarp however I wanted, but I couldn't build a fire. If I survived that night, then I could build a fire and make a lean-to if I could do those things. Well, the first night was miserable, and the second night came, and I was wrapped up. I wrapped up in this little tarp, it's like a shower curtain, to keep body heat in. And every 45 minutes, I'd have to get up and do push-ups and walk around the trees just to get my blood pumping, and then to get back. And at one point I had to pee naturally. I thought, well, I'm just going to knee to the edge of the tarp and pee into the snow. And of course, and I couldn't make this up, I peed on the tarp. Then I had to wrap back up in the tarp. And I remember right then, at that moment, that night, thinking, I'm going to write that novel I always wanted to write. I'm getting too old for this. And so I did. And that was the Royal Wulff Murders, which some of you have read. So what we're going to do is take a little, there's the Royal Wulff Murders. We're going to take a tiny break, and I will attempt to tie this fly. I'm going to put another little light on it. I've already taken the liberty of putting the tail on, because that's the most boring part. And this is not going to be a real good one. I may have to make a better one for our raffle. It's not really a raffle, our drawing. So now I'm going to put in the, this was developed by the great late Lee Wolf, who called it strawberry shortcake.
And this Royal Wulff fly, it's not meant to mimic any living insect, correct? Attractor.
Strawberry shortcake, like it was for, dessert for a trout. It doesn't really strictly resemble anything in nature.
Right.
In smaller sizes, it's a very good caddisfly imitation. And mayfly, in smaller.
Okay.
All right.
And what are you using as your?
This is calf tail. The white is calf tail. And the tail that I tied in is moose mane, which I just like because it's sort of cool. And because I cut it off a moose that I hunted many years ago.
Ah, that was going to be my next question. Did you
that's
collect?
Where it came from.
Collect.
I try to, use all my own fly, things that I've found. I used to be the king of roadkill,
Yes.
Especially skunk. I love skunk hair.
It's even mentioned in the Royal Wulff Murders. If everybody has read that, they talk about roadkill and for flies. Yep. Yeah, you do. Yep.
So we're going to do this one sort of fast, sort of sloppy, but it'll give you an idea. I'm putting just a teeny bit of glue on here. It sort of helps it. So now the tricky part is you've got it sticking out that way. You want to bring it back and wrap in front of it. And then you want to separate it into halves and figure 8 the thread around it so that the wings sort of point up. And I see I've got just a couple too many there on that side. So we'll put them over, there. I'll just put another little bit there for that. So now we are going to clip this off, and we're going to get these upright. This is actually a difficult fly to tie, although it seems like it should be simple. And maybe it was simple when my fingers were younger. But, I tie a signature fly for each book. And I enjoy that. It used to be, this one's on the cover. The Grey Ghost, several are on the cover Most are not. They'll be on an inside flap of the book. So I've got the upright wings here. And now we're going to cut this. And we're going to take the thread back to the back of the hook. Like I said, it's not the best. And I'm going to put in 2 strands of peacock curl, which I found on the ground. Peacock curl is useful for lots of different flies. So I'm going to wrap that peacock curl. And I just broke a stem, but that's okay. 3 or 4 times, and we're going to tie that off. And then we're going to put in just a little bit of red floss. So we put that at the middle part of the hook. And we'll tie that off. And then we'll finish off by wrapping again the peacock curl. So you have a little peacock curl bracing a little red abdomen. And in smaller sizes, it actually is a very good imitation of an ant. It doesn't look like an ant, but they hit it because of that little red stuff sticking out. So there you are. Now, all we have to do is put on the hackle. And I'm just going to reinforce this a tiny bit. Okay, so now we have chicken feather, and we're going to tie in 2 of them by the tip. This also is a big part.
Do you have chickens, Keith? Did you get these from your chickens?
What's that?
Do you have chickens that you collected these from?
No, that's actually, I do. Our neighbor up on the Missouri River has chickens, and I pick up feathers there. So now we wrap the hackle behind the wing, and then in front of the wing.
Oh.
And come on. Then we will wrap the second hackle. And tie that off at the eye. And believe it or not, it sort of worked. Always a miracle. It's a little rough, but most of my flies are a little rough. I'm not the world's best fly tyer, but I started when I was about 4 years old. And by the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I was tying flies for an entire campground of fishermen on the Ossabaw River in Michigan through what's called the Holy Water Stretch, which was the first fly-only stretch of river in the United States. And here was this little 7 or 8 year old boy tying for all these serious fishermen. I'm doing a whip finish here with my fingers, and we'll cement it later. But so that is sort of a Royal Wulff. Sort of hard to see.
Up a little bit.
Up a little bit?
Yep. Just with your hand. Yep. There we go. Right there.
Sure.
Hold it. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that looks great.
I like to tie them in about a size 16. This is an 8. But, for purposes, it was a lot easier to do this one.
That makes sense.
I promise the one in the raffle will be a little better tied.
I don't think anyone
to do it,
Yes.
So,
no, I would think that was really cool. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
We did have some questions come in as you were tying the fly.
Sure.
So I'll ask those questions since they're specific to the fly part. And then we do have some general questions. If you're ready,
Okay.
unless you have other stories you want to tell us first.
I'll tell stories anytime.
Anytime.
Probably as a result of people asking questions.
Perfect. Okay, so well, first
there.
you have a message from Patrice. She says, "Hi Keith, it's Patrice."
I know Patrice. Hey, Patrice.
She asks, "What is your favorite roadkill recipe?"
It's Patrice. Patrice and I are going to be speakers at the Hemingway conference next summer.
Very cool.
I went to graduate school in journalism with Patrice, and I have not seen Patrice since, but we've stayed in contact.
Well, that's
so
awesome.
Hopefully Patrice next year, huh? Roadkill. Well, skunk. I have to say, skunk flies. A lot of times, the white stripe of a skunk is a very good white material, and some people think or swear by it because they think that having a little bit of skunk on a fly eliminates any human odor. So I can remember, I was famous for this because there's a photograph of me. I was driving to college. There was a dead skunk on the road, and I had a peanut butter sandwich in one hand, and I was holding up a dead skunk by the other and putting it in the car because I wanted that skin,
That's a story. Oh my gosh. That is awesome. Lisa, your cousin, says, "Why do they call them flies?" And yeah, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm curious.
Well, that's a good question, Lisa.
Yeah.
Because some of the flies that you tie are indeed flies, related to flies. They're a form of fly. Mayflies, caddisflies, stoneflies are all related, and they can correctly be called flies. But a lot of the things we imitate are not flies, obviously. So they're just sort of lumped under that category. And in different parts of the world, people call them bugs. They won't call them flies. And there are just literally thousands of patterns. I was part of a book of America's favorite trout flies. It's a huge book, and I was honored to be asked to contribute. Anyway, you're right; they aren't flies sometimes.
Yeah, that is a good question. All right, we have a question. One, I think, maybe two more about flies specifically, and then
Sure.
Gerald says, looking in the Buffalo Jump Blues, he doesn't see a signature fly. So do you remember what the flies were for each of the books in the series?
Yeah, Buffalo Jump Blues. It might have been the usual suspect. There's a usual suspect, which is an Atlantic salmon fly. But I actually tied a Buffalo Jump Blues fly. It is a sculpin pattern that I put blue eyes on. And I believe if you have a hardcover of that book, it's on the inside flap. And then it's also on the spine of the book. So that's it. The Buffalo Jump Blues is an actual sculpin pattern that I sort of invented for the sake of the book.
Yeah, very good.
I can see it from here on the bookshelf.
Perfect. Next question. From Stephen, what is your favorite fly to tie?
Well, I tie a fly called Sam's Skinny Minnow, which is in the books, which is the world's simplest marabou fly to tie. You just palmer a plume of olive marabou on a hook, and you palmer a plume of black marabou in front of it, and they sort of mix together. And it's a very simple, slim fly that can imitate a minnow, but also can imitate a leech. And it's so small and thin that I think it gives the fish very little chance to find fault with it. And it's a very fragile fly. You catch a fish or two and so they're not sold commercially as a result. So, it's a fly that most fish in the rivers have never seen. So that's my favorite one to tie because it's so simple and because I'm getting older now. But I'm telling you, the little mice patterns like this one, look at that cute little thing. He's got little ears, a little tail. They're fun to tie.
You said you were going to take those mice to Alaska. Is that what I saw? Okay, on your Facebook page?
I'm going to do a 2-week float in Alaska with my brother and my son and a friend. 100-mile float, 100 miles of bear.
Oh my goodness. Good luck.
Bears around every bend, I'm afraid.
Oh my gosh. Okay, there's a question or a note from Haruko, who said he fished the holy waters last fall with dries and he found your island. I don't know what that means.
I know Haruko.
Oh, okay.
Haruko and her husband are from Cincinnati and they're fly fishermen. And in my book called, I think it's Cold Hearted River, Marguerite is sort of the love interest in it. She's not really, but she lives in a house on the Ossabaw River. And so what was the question about?
Oh, I think it was just a statement that she found your island. When
yes,
she...
well, yes, yes. I used to, my summers from college, I worked for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, building habitat in trout rivers, primarily the Ossabaw Manistee. And Bill Buck, who's 90 now, but just as vigorous as ever, was a former Air Force pilot, fighter pilot. And he gave me free rein to build whatever I wanted on one stretch of the river. So I built an island that was 60 feet long, planted trees on it and everything. And because the Ossabaw is one of the world's most stable rivers, in other words, it doesn't flood, that island is still intact. I would say I built it around 1972, long time ago, and it's still there. I went back to speak at the Harbor Springs Book Festival a couple years ago while I was researching the Hemingway book. And I drove back there and Bill and a friend of his took me down the Holy Water stretch in a classic riverboat, Ossabaw riverboat. And we went by the island and took photographs.
That's really fun.
Yeah.
I think Bill might be here tonight. He asked you a question.
Good luck.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. If it's spelled, maybe. And he says he wants to know what McCafferty's masterpiece was.
Well, that's what it is. And Bill was the one that called it the masterpiece. He called it the masterpiece. And because it was so big, I don't know how long I spent building it. But he and I are both proud of it, the fact that it still stands today. And Bill's who I was telling you about. He's the pilot working for the DNR. He did that after he retired from the military.
Well, he's here tonight, so that's.
And I hope to see you, Bill. I hope to get back to Michigan as soon as I can. I was supposed to, for Field and Stream, I was supposed to follow Hemingway's footsteps as he fished and camped alone on the Big Two-Hearted River, which of course was just a name. The Big Two-Hearted River is actually not much of a trout stream, but his sister river, the Fox, is. And so Hemingway was simply using a name that was, a better name for a story. But I was supposed to follow the Nick Adams as he hiked up the Fox River and camped, sort of as recovering from war. And then I would have seen you, Bill. We would have got together. But of course, that was canceled because of COVID. But I still may do it.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah.
And what an adventure. Okay, we have another question from Russell. Where did the idea of using the gray ghost fly, which he thinks of as an Atlantic salmon fly from, I think it's Rangeley, Maine?
Rangeley Lake District in Maine.
Yeah, where did the idea of using that gray ghost fly come from, or for a story set in Montana?
Yeah, I realize that we're in Montana, but fly fishing is a movable sport, as Hemingway might say. And so just because you're a fisherman here in Montana doesn't mean you aren't interested in fishing for bonefish in Florida, or sailfish off of Belize, or the great golden mahseer in the Himalayas of India. Carrie Stevens was married to a Maine guide, and she originated the gray ghost and a number of other patterns, and she is considered the mother and the father of the modern streamer fly. And the gray ghost is a beautiful fly. And so it was, for the purposes of the story, I wanted somebody to steal it, and I wanted it to be something that was of value. And the gray ghost was of value historically, as if you have one that's actually tied by Carrie Stevens, which this one was in the house there. So I wanted to credit her with inventing the modern streamer fly, and it suited because it's a beautiful fly. It's got a lot of history behind it. It's a truly American fly. And she used it to catch the second biggest trout that year entered in the Field and Stream Fishing Contest in the 1920s. And she parlayed that into a career. That's why.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we have one more question before there's a specific question. Yeah. Actually, no, these are both kind of general for both the Stranahan series. So everybody, I'll just plug if you have any questions, please do either drop them in the chat. If you want everyone who's in attendance to see, make sure you change the 2 in the chat to all panelists and attendees, and then everyone will be able to see your question. Or if you'd prefer, you can use the Q&A or raise your hand. And I have one question that was submitted beforehand as well, but I'll ask these 2 first. So one is from Kathy, who comes into the library. She says she loves your books and she's read all except the latest one.
Yeah.
In the Royal Wulff Murders, or I guess in the series, why do you refer to Bozeman as Bridger when the other cities are their regular names?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not saying I did everything right. I had decisions to make, and I didn't want the town in the fictional Highlight County. I didn't want the county seat. I didn't want it to be a place as big as Bozeman. For one thing, a sheriff is just a pencil pusher. The more people there are on staff. And I wanted her police force or a county sheriff's force to be small. So I tried to make up a fictional town that might be in the vicinity of Ennis or Norris or Three Forks, in that area, and call it Bridger. Now, I know that there actually is another Bridger in eastern Montana, which is a teeny tiny little town. It's much smaller than my Bridger. So that was it. I decided to do it that way because Bozeman was just too big. And, you know, I had to make a decision whether the places that Sean was going to be walking through or driving through in the course of a story, were these going to be always literally correct? Or was part of it going to be made up? For example, $3 Bridge in the Madison is still called that, but you no longer put your $3 $1 bills in the little slot or hand them to the old stork of a man who used to collect them. But I still call it $3 Bridge. And so most readers, I think, enjoy that. They know part of it is fiction. I actually have readers who've come from as far away as Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Knoxville, Tennessee, just to drive around and try to visit all the places that Sean goes to in the books and try to figure out which ones are true and which ones are made up. And while we're at it, you know, those people become friends of mine. One of the most unexpected parts of writing the novels was not just the recognition you get, but the people who write to you. Because, you know, when I worked for Field and Stream, the magazine sort of stood between the writers and the readers. This huge sort of impersonal magazine. And I had relatively little contact with the readers, although it was reaching 12 million people a month. You know, it was a huge magazine. And I started writing the novels, and I started to receive, you know, emails back from readers. And I write back to everyone and ask them for their address so I can send them postcards. And, you know, I try to, and I do, you know, I'm not so successful that I say, well, I have too much to do. You know, I can't answer everybody. Yeah, I can answer everybody, and I do. But it's more than that, because the books are really hard to write. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And always a voice in my ear telling me that I'm getting too old or I can't do it. I think that's natural. And so if I open up email at a coffee shop where I'm working in the morning, or for the last year here at home, and there's a letter from a reader who's assuring me that I'm not wasting my time or their time, well, that's great. It gives you a little boost, you know, it gives you a little pick-me-up, and you can take that little bit of confidence back to the novel, which has been so difficult to write. And so I think it's a valuable thing. The interaction that you have with the readers becomes much, much more important to you than you ever thought it might be.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about that, I just have written down here, Mark Paddock. This is something that just happened today, which I find was very interesting. How life, in this case, my life, can turn on a dime, as they say. You know, when I graduated from college, all I knew is I wanted to go to the Florida Keys and catch a bonefish. And I did that, and I worked there. And I also worked as a driller for the state of Washington. But I knew I'd go back to graduate school. And my idea was I'd go back to graduate, get a master's degree in fisheries biology, and sort of parlay that into writing about fishing for a living. And I got accepted into the master's program in fisheries. And I went to see the professor. And he said, if you're not doing anything this summer, if you don't have plans already, why don't you go to University of Michigan's biological station and get to work on a thesis right away? He says, you go down these stairs, across the street, and up the stairs of this other building, and I want you to talk to Mark Paddock. Mark Paddock is not a biologist himself, but he runs the biological station, the bug camp on Douglas Lake, as they call it, which is sort of a rustic place with a lot of cabins, and it's where people teaches, graduate level courses. So I go down there, I go up the stairs, and I knock on Mark Paddock's door. And I talked to Mark for 20 minutes, I would say. And he said, "You don't want to be a fisheries biologist, you want to be a writer. Go out this door, to go down those steps, cross this street, and go up in that building, which is the Literature, Science, and Arts building, and talk to Charles Eisendrath, because Charles Eisendrath runs the master's degree and master's program in journalism." So that's what I did. And I went up and Charles liked to take people on the basis of whether he thought they would amuse him. And he thought I would amuse him because I was somebody who hunted and fished, which he just, being an urbane man from the city, he just thought was ridiculous. Ironically, years later, I was listening to National Public Radio, and they're interviewing Charles Eisendrath, who was a spokesman for hunting. And I'm thinking, where did that come from? Obviously, it came from me, Anyway, so that's an example, it's like I met Mark Paddock, and he changed the course of my life in 20 minutes. And if I had not met him, I would have gotten a degree in fisheries biology, and I may have become a writer, but all the rest of my life would not be what it is today, certainly. Anyway, as a writer, you become interested in those things.
Absolutely.
I'm one of those writers who, and something is a lot of people ask is, do you plot the books out? Do you know what's going to happen before you start? Well, I know writers who do that. C.J. Box likes to say, when the going gets tough, I hold on to that outline like a lifeline. It gets me through. And as hard as I've tried to develop plots in my head and write them down in detail as a guide to follow in writing the book, I'm just an utter failure at it. So what I do is I start with a story, a very strong, what I think is a very strong scene. In almost all cases, is something that really happened. The husband and wife who shot each other's horses in the blizzard at the beginning of Cold Hearted River, that actually happened. The story about fishing with Jack Hemingway, I used to fish with Jack Hemingway. We were both colleagues at Field and Stream. That actually happened. So there's almost everything actually happened. The mountain lion confrontation at the beginning, the Bangtail Ghost, that happened to me literally. The only difference was, in my case, there were two lions, and for simplification, I had just one lion in the thing. So I start with that. I have a strong scene. That'll get me the first 20 pages. And I often have an idea for the end, which may change, but I have an idea for it. And if I'm lucky, I have a larger theme, a larger backdrop issue to set the story against, like in the Gone with the Wind, it's the Civil War. I'm not comparing myself to that, but that's an example. So I have those three things: a beginning, an end, and a backdrop against which to paint a smaller, more human story. That leaves about 280 pages that are blank. And in those 280 pages, I just sort of muddle my way through. It's my agent says I'm a muddler througher. I just muddle my way through. It seems like I can't do it. And often I get 2/3, 3/4 of the way through, and I just run up against a wall. And then I'll go back to the beginning and just rewrite it and just go on through, hoping that momentum will take me through that part. And I'll finally get to the end. I just finished a story about children growing up in Appalachia, where I did. And it's so hard to do. I'll tell you the one good thing, though, about the COVID was people ask me, well, what did you do during COVID? Well, I wrote a whole book and I cured my toenail fungus. And that's about it.
Well, if that's all you got, I
That's
take
all I
it.
got. But the
Take
book,
it.
which normally drives me crazy, was actually therapeutic because, I still had an ongoing project and still do for that matter, because, so anyway, I just.
Was that the Bangtail Ghost that you wrote during COVID, or is it the next
No,
one?
no, it's a story about children growing up
Okay,
in
that book.
Appalachia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure if it was
Not the Bangtail Ghost. I finished the Bangtail Ghost in May of last year.
Okay.
Or well, actually, it got all through the editing process at that point.
Yeah, it was published in August, if you haven't read
Yeah.
that one. Yep. Yeah. So we have a comment that someone, Gerald loves your stories. They're great because he loves the settings and the characters. Just a comment. And then
And where's he from?
He didn't say where he's from.
Sorry.
And let's see. There was a question. Do you see yourself as Sean Stranahan?
Well, yeah, but he's better looking, better athletic. He's an improved version.
That was from Bob, by the way.
I sort of wanted him to be. I wanted him to be a central character around which more, eccentric characters revolve. So I don't have him paint him as the eccentric character that I originally envisioned him. I put him as, in the center in the axis of other people. I started writing the books because I had written so many articles for Field and Stream and other magazines, not just Field and Stream, that I was sort of burned out. I get 3 or 4 stories a year, which I really enjoyed writing. And the rest of it was, I do the very best job I could, but it was not really what I wanted to do. But I had kids to put through college, and I had to keep my day job. And so when I started writing the Royal Wulff Murders, it was sort of as an escape, and I wanted to have a character who was from the Midwest or the East, so that they would see the changing West through, through innocent eyes, So it's not, I didn't want my character to be, a rancher or, or a ranch woman like Martha was. I wanted it to be somebody who was seeing everything with fresh eyes. And she's people say, well, how do you come up with your characters? But, it's like Martha was just a gift. I turned to the first chapter of the Royal Wulff Murders, the second chapter, the first chapter, I knew I had to have a sheriff. I didn't know whether it'd be a man or a woman. I just started writing, and in 15 minutes, I'd written Martha's character. I took my best friend growing up's name was Entinger, Karen Enninger. So I made her Martha Ettinger, and Martha I took, who I associated with a friend of mine who was a pig farmer on the Yellowstone River. Anyway, in fact, her name was Gwen Peterson. Gwen Peterson's a real person. She's a cowboy poet and an ex-rancher and lives in Big Timber.
Well, that's awesome. Actually, we have a question about Martha.
Sure.
Oh, Gerald, by the way, who had the comment earlier, he's from Arkansas. So thanks for joining us, Gerald. All right. So John says, I have difficulty visualizing Martha, and he always has. What famous, or which famous person does she most resemble? Do you have that person in mind?
I did. I sort of had her at one end of the spectrum sort of be like Frances McDormand, and another end like the actress who was in Friday Night Lights. I can't remember her name right now. I sometimes see her. Yeah, just type up Friday Night Lights and I have people say, well, that's who you look like. But she also looks like what's her name I just talked about?
Gwen Peterson?
Yeah.
Gwen, okay. Connie Britton
Connie Britton.
is the Friday Night Lights actress.
Yeah, right. Connie
Or
Britton.
actor. Okay.
Because I have Martha at one point saying people think I'm Connie Britton or something. She says, frankly, I don't see it. I don't see it either, but I had somebody say it. And so now I think of it.
Yeah.
But I had her be sort of more like, what's her name in Fargo,
Frances McDermott?
Frances McDormand in Fargo.
McDormand,
That
yeah.
stage of her career.
Okay.
And a combination of other people. People start out as one person. It's like my fishing guide, Sam, is actually two different people. He's two real people that I sort of mix together.
Right.
That's the biggest lie in all of novel writings is the little disclaimer at the beginning that all the characters are, works of fiction, and any resemblance to people living or dead is, entirely
completely accidental, right? Exactly.
What a bunch of bullshit. Yeah. Everybody is based on real
someone,
people.
Right?
Although what it is they're usually based on 2 or 3 real people, and then as you start to write them, they take on a life of their own. So they're really not at that point somebody you knew. At least that's the way it is for me.
That's fair. All right. So Andrew, I'm sorry I missed your question earlier. It just flew right by. So Andrew from Toronto says, any chance that Sean will make it to Canada? And he says, preferably North Bay, Ontario. And has he been to Whitefish? So 2-part question. Will he make it to...
I've been to far northern Ontario, up by St. John's Bay, up where the polar bears are.
Sean has, or you have?
I did.
You did.
For Field and Stream, I took a long canoe trip fishing for sea run brook trout. So I've been to that country. I've been to the Shield portion, the sort of a Lake Shield area north of Toronto, I think. My mother and father went on a honeymoon there years ago, to the name of a lake that escapes me. So I don't know, people say, well, my characters are very strongly centered in Montana. And my publisher, the previous publisher anyway, and my agent would always remind me that Montana is a character in my books. Don't ever forget that or take that for granted. So I tried to get Sean out of the country to India for a couple chapters of The Bangtail Ghost. Now, wouldn't you know that both my editor and my agent both said, well, they really liked the book, but they thought that part was going to have to go. So all the parts I wrote when I had Sean in India, they didn't make it. So I have him briefly in Cuba. I have him very briefly in the Bahamas. But for the most part, I've kept him around town. But that doesn't mean that in the future, because I do intend to write more of those books, that he can't, get out of the country a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would like to get him out of the country. I have him in Canada, by the way. He has been to Canada up by the Maurice River and the Bulkley River. Maurice. I have the woman character in Dead Man's Fancy be from that area, and I have Sean going back up to Canada at the end of the book. I think I have him going to Canada at the beginning of the book too. So I do, but usually it's only a few sentences or a few pages.
Right. And then what about Whitefish? Has he been to did Sean go to Whitefish in any of the novels?
You mean Whitefish in Montana?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that Sean has been to Whitefish. Where though? How the hell did that happen? I don't know. I go up there and sign books every year, so I may be getting that confused. I thought Sean had been to Whitefish.
You've been to Whitefish.
I'll get him there.
Okay. Can't ask for more than that. So let's see. Linda is from Ann Arbor. She says she thinks you're great and she loves your work. And she says that journalists always make the greatest novelists because journalists know how to write a sentence. So
Well, that's very interesting because, I was a career, I had a career as a magazine writer and journalist. And then came time to write the novels. First of all, journalism, all nonfiction is sort of based on the declarative sentence with or without subclauses. And you learn to write in a certain way. And then when you start writing the novels, you realize right away that novels are all about character and dialogue. And so even though I'd been a professional writer for decades before writing the novels, when I first started writing the Royal Wulff Murders, I had never got anybody in and out of a room. I had never had 2 pages of dialogue. I had to learn all that. That was all different. One thing that's interesting is, I always say the best job I ever had was as a crime reporter in California, Bakersfield, California, and I was a night side reporter. When you are a reporter, you are tuned into the city. You know everybody. You know the cops. You know the stories that got printed, the backstories behind them, and you know the stories that didn't get printed for whatever. And you are constantly talking to people. Then you become a magazine writer, and that's what I segued into. And now you're at home and maybe you're interviewing somebody once a week, and maybe you're talking to your editor in New York, and maybe you aren't. And so you've taken a big step back from your fellow human beings in a way. Then you start writing novels, and now you've really isolated yourself. It's almost like in order to write about people, you have to divorce yourself from people. But it's more of a circumstantial thing. Writing novels is something you do alone, and you may do some research, and you may have some contact with people that way, and you may have contact with your editors or publishers or agents, but essentially you're working alone. And I'm not sure it's a real healthy way to live, actually. I think human beings are made to, born to interact with each other, and being a solitary novelist does not fit in well. So I find that there's a lot of difference between journalism and writing novels, not just because as a journalist you can write a sentence, although the discipline helps. As a journalist, whether it's a daily journalist or a magazine writer, you have deadlines. You have word lengths that you have to write to. You become a professional in a sense, and you never wait for something as fickle as inspiration.
I like that word, fickle.
Yeah. So that's, I don't know whether that answers the question, but there sure is big differences between the 2 ways of writing.
Yeah. Bruce and Mike ask, are the Liars and Fly Tires Club members based on people you have met?
First of all, there's the Liars and Fly Tires Club hat.
Ta-da!
I meant to put that hat on while I tied the fly.
I forgot to, yeah.
So anyway, one of these will be a donation too. I sell these through my website, but there are several colors, but I'll give you what I got.
Thank you.
So what's the question?
Oh, yes. Are the club members in the books, which if you've only read the Royal Wulff Murders, the club has not yet been introduced, just for the people listening. Yep, second book, so keep reading. Right. Are they based on people you have met?
Oh, yeah. Yes. They're actually, we actually are the Madison River Liars and Fly Tires Club, heavy on the liars part of it. I'm actually the only member who's a fly tire. But I always envisioned that cabin of the Madison. We're a poor outfit. We don't even have a cabin, but but we sort of do. for years, 30 some years, I went and continued to go fishing with three of my closest friends, and the four of us every year in late June or early July have floated and camped on a river in Montana or just car camped. And the same four of us have been doing it now for almost 40 years. Long, long time. Maybe 35 years. I can't. Well, maybe 38 years. Long, long, long time. And so I wanted to sort of put those people in my own fictional Madison River Liars and Fly Tyers Club. And I did not take those people as they were. I changed them a lot. Some are people that I know. Kenneth Winston, who's a Black man. He is very based on Kenneth Williams, who was my best friend in high school. And the other people are more or less the drunken San Francisco novelist isn't based on somebody I know. So yeah, they're based on people I know. And we now actually, one of our members has built a house on the Madison River in roughly the area where I set the stories. And another of the fishing buddies that I had owns a house farther upstream on the Madison. So whereas we used to all go fishing there, and living in tents, now we actually have cabins.
That sounds like an upgrade.
Yeah, it's a great, anyway.
Speaking of people in your books based on real characters or real people Jody, I think Jody you might know, she sends you hugs, and she also says, when are you going to base a character on Gail? And I assume that means Gail, your wife.
Well, and who's this from, by the way?
From Jody.
Jody?
Jody.
From where?
I think from here, from around here.
Oh, I know Jody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Jody. Hi, Jody. So what was your question?
Are you going to base a character on Gail, your wife?
I have.
Yeah. Oh, you have?
She is the reporter, Gail Stalker. She is the reporter for the little local newspaper who's short and wears a trench coat. And my wife says, reporters never wear trench coats anymore. That's ridiculous. Take it, she always wants me to change that. So she has been a part of, in 5 books anyway, but she doesn't have, it's Jody Housen, yeah. She doesn't have a major part yet, but she's in the books, Gail Stalker.
Yes, Jody, she says she hasn't read that far yet, so.
Yeah, she's in the books.
Okay. Let's see. There's a comment from Kathy, and she says she truly respects the use of your Native American character in your books, especially due to the number of reservations in Montana. And Harold was the character's first name. Harold Littlefeather, I think.
Yeah.
He was one of my favorite characters, actually. I must say that. He was an interesting guy.
Well, I run him. First of all, his appearance was loosely based on an Indian man who lived with us here for a short period of time, and he's based on somebody else I know. But when I wrote, especially not Cold Hearted River, but A Death in Eden, set on Montana's Smith River, in a way that's Harold's book. He's equal character in it to Sean or Martha. And so that I always run my books past Indian readers, Native American readers. And that book in particular, I ran by 3 people because Harold is more of a character there. But I start with the premise that he is a man and first. And that's not necessarily the way some people would look at it. But it's much easier to write if you just envision them as a person and try not to make their ethnicity paramount in any character, in any dialogue with them or anything.
Yeah.
So it was just natural. I mean, we have 7 Indian reservations in Montana. Sean gets around. It's inevitable that you come in contact with. That reminds me of the Buffalo Jump Blues book, where I transport the Mermaid Bar to the banks of the Madison, because that's the Sip and Dip, which is the actual Mermaid Bar up in Great Falls. People always ask me, is that true? Is that true? Well, yeah, it is actually. And so I had a character who was half Blackfeet, half white, who had grown up in Great Falls and in Browning, and she was one of the mermaids in the book. I wrote that book and I gave it to people to read. And one of them was a woman named Robin. And Robin, just by complete coincidence, is half Blackfeet, half white, grew up in Great Falls and Browning, and used to swim topless in the mermaid tank at the Sip and Dip in Great Falls. She and her girlfriend would jump in because it's an old like motor hotel, and that's actually a swimming pool. It's not a mermaid tank. And so anybody can jump in it. And so she and her girlfriend used to do it. And it's like, I drew that character almost exactly to Robin, and I'd never met Robin. Just strange.
Small world. Yeah, a small, strange world.
Yeah, right.
There's a question from John, who I'm assuming doesn't live in the Valley. He said, what is Belgrade like, except for being near the Madison, and should he come and see it?
What's he want to know about Belgrade?
Yeah, he wants to know what Belgrade's like.
Well, it's not part of my stories, really.
Yeah, maybe because I'm in Belgrade right now with the library.
Yeah, I have put, I place scenes in Bozeman in the stories because my Bridger is a fictional town. So I have Bozeman as being the big town, or the big city, as they call it. Belgrade, of course, has changed a lot. I mean, it was 8 miles away, but it could have been 80 miles away at one point. And now it's grown and grown and grown to where we have housing problems there and everything. I've got nothing against Belgrade. Belgrade's always been very nice to me, especially all of you at the library. But I haven't yet placed a scene there, or have I? Do you remember anything? I have somebody who's in the Mile High Sex Club, which is in one of my books, Crazy Mountain Kiss, Mile and a Half High Sex Club, I call it. People always say, was that real? I said, well, it's based on this operation that used to work out of Key West, Florida, where this guy had a paper cup and he would take couples up into the air and have them be filmed having sex 1.5 miles high. That's how he made his living. And in one time he took this couple up who were from Cuba and a little bit older than his run-of-the-mill couples, more like in their 40s or 50s. He said, well, why not? We'll take them up. So he takes them up. And instead of taking off their clothes and having sex, they tried to hijack the plane. He gets in a fight with them. He lands the plane on the ocean, on the bay there, on the east side of the Key West, south side, and gets into a fight with the guy, and gets out of the plane, and the plane sinks, and the 2 people who have tried to hijack it drown. That was the end of that 1.5 mile high sex club, which had a name on it. I just can't remember it. So I just moved that operation to Montana and changed the details. But there was a question in that. There was a person in that book, one of the people in the sex club, who is a librarian or works in the library in Bozeman. Not in Belgrade, but in Bozeman. So I was talking to people at the big, there's two big library wingdings a year. One is the American Library Association and one is the Public Library Association. And I've spoken at both. And at one of them, and there's like 400 people in the audience, and I'm up there with 3 other panelists, and they're all big New York Times bestsellers. And then there's me, who's not. And and I say, well, I know some of you are wondering what I'm doing here, They say, well, I'm the only character. I'm the only writer here who has a sexy librarian as a character in his books. And immediately some woman jumps from her seat and says, all librarians are sexy.
You heard it here first, folks. I love
but that was Belgrade Library. I mean, Bozeman Library is where I set that, I believe. Because I said there were, we had the gray owl that was hanging around for about a month one year. Great gray owl. People came from across the country to photograph him.
Yeah. Okay. We have, Lisa, who, if I remember correctly, is your cousin, says, when are you writing your autobiography?
I don't know. I'm not, I've never felt I'm important enough to have an autobiography. I've been a little lucky in that, I chronicled a lot of my life in the pages of magazines. So even though I have not written an autobiography, just to leave behind to the kids or whatever, I sort of have done that through dozens and dozens of stories. It seems like I've done a lot with my life, but writing's, it's not necessarily true. I live through my readers. I fish through my readers. They tell me what they're doing and send pictures of them wearing a hat and holding up a big fish. Whereas I'm the one that's just sitting in the chair with the cat on his lap trying to make stuff up, get paid for telling lies.
Well, that's okay. I think everybody here is grateful that you sit in the chair with your cat and tell lies.
Well, this book I'm writing about Appalachia, I just finished the second draft. All right, I'll finish it in about 2 days. That's something I always wanted to do. And it's not a memoir. It's a fiction book, but almost every scene in it has happened, either to me or to somebody I know in Appalachia, where I grew up. And so, in a sense, that's not an autobiography, but it's a sense of the life I lived as a child. It's just something I had to write. I always wanted to do it. And it was to, cast a light on the scourge of mountaintop removal mining in Appalachia, which was sort of based on myself as a kid, because I grew up where everything was strip mine. And that's all. Mountaintop removal is just nothing but another form of strip mining. And when that would happen, the overflow, the rivers would run red and the fish would die. And the little snakes would get sores on their heads. And so what I would do is I would rescue them by the dozens and take them to streams that were suitable, I hoped, that did not have, not running red with poisons. And I used that as sort of the inspiration to write that book. And when my mother passed away a couple of years ago, the last thing I told her was, The last thing I did was read that aloud to her, what I had at that time, because I took 10 years off to write the Sean Stranahan stories, and I never got back to that book, although I'd started it at the same time I started the Royal Wulff Murders. And I promised her I would write that book. And so I did. And so whether it's commercial or not, that is, in a way, an autobiography.
And you're not sure if it will be published yet, or?
No, it's about ready to go off to my agent, Dominic. Okay. And Dominic may say, that's unpublishable. I don't know. So it may not be commercial, but maybe it is. I just have no idea.
Yeah, well, we'll look for it. And yeah, we'll find out. We do have a few more questions, and sure. If you have any last minute ones, I do want to end on time just to respect everyone's time. Yeah. So get those in, and I'll get through as many as we can. Yeah. I'm going to ask the question that came in over email actually yesterday, so I really want to make sure I answer this one, or ask it at least. What are you currently reading, and that you would recommend, or do you have any books that you recommend regularly? And that's from Jill. I like
Alan First's espionage novel set just pre-World War II in France and Germany and continental Europe. So I'm reading one of his books right now called I can't remember the name of it, Dark Star. Anyway, I don't read much detective fiction. I don't read much in the so-called genre that sometimes people lump me into. I have sort of a reading disability, and it's very difficult for me to read 2 sentences in a row. So I just pick up a book, read a sentence, skip around, read another. After 5 or 6 days, I would challenge you. Find a sentence I haven't read. I've read every sentence in the book, but in no particular order. And so it doesn't make any sense. So the only way I cannot do that is I can read out loud, like to my wife at night. Then I can go from beginning to end. And so to me, writing is a form of therapy because it's an exercise in successional, whatever, writing. I'm not like some writers will start with the end, or they'll write the major scenes in the book and link them up. Whereas I can't read a book 2 sentences in a row hardly. But when I write, I start at the beginning and push my way through to the end. So I do it linearly. So in a way, it's a form of therapy for me.
That makes sense. And say the author again.
Well, the author's name was Alan First.
Alan First, okay. Yeah. And then in regards to the way you write your books, you mentioned you start with big events, some key events. You have maybe have an idea of the ending, and then you have the backdrop. Do you have an idea of where you want the characters to go and what you want to happen to the main characters in the story throughout, or does that come along with the writing process?
No, it just comes along with it. That's almost too much work for me. It's too hard for me to think logically like that. I just sort of make it up as I go along, and it works for me. It's not a very fast way to write a book because you're constantly going back and revising so that it makes sense. Whereas if you have a plot line that you are following, you don't have to go back as often because you've got it sketched out for you. So maybe with the right medication or drugs, I could learn how to write more efficiently.
I think you're doing fine. Then we have a question from Kristen, who lives here in Belgrade. Have you ever worked in law enforcement? And she's was just wondering how, if not, how do you research the investigations and the manhunts? Well,
I tried to, I know a little bit about search and rescue. I personally have not in law enforcement, but people in my family are. And my uncle was a game warden, and my first cousin Billy McCafferty, is the police chief of Steubenville, Ohio, which was a very crime-ridden place, and he's got a lot of experience. So I have people in the family, and then I'm friendly with Jim Cashel, ex-sheriff, and I don't want my books to be police procedurals. For one thing, I'm not qualified to do that, not without an awful lot of research. And other people do that. You know, I'm more interested in having a character who is outside the mainstream law enforcement, working towards it. I'm always thankful, I'm always enjoy it when people in law enforcement tell me that they like the books. So it means I'm not doing too much wrong, you know. I'm sure I do a lot of procedural things wrong. Part of it is the pressure of writing a book a year. It is very difficult to not just fact check stuff, but to do the research that you do. It would be, if I had written those books, all of them spaced a year and a half apart, it would give me more time. But also it's very important to write a book a year in the way the publishing business is structured. It naturally follows a yearly cycle. And also I think it's good for you, even though you have tremendous pressure to be prolific, you are involved. You are involved with people in the editorial process and your agent and other people like that. And if you're only writing, and also for your readers, and your readers will, you know, first they'll get mad at you and then they'll quit reading you. You know, I get readers saying, where's the next book? I get one of those almost every day. So for very practical reasons, it's important to write frequently and not just write a book every 2 or 3 years. But it's very difficult to do.
All right. And then we have 2 more questions and then we'll end for the day. So Jody says, what happened to the birds that you adopted a few years ago?
Well, Jody, I was tempted to ban my birds, which were common grackles, as it turned out to be. And I didn't. So they all flew away on about October the 12th that year. And I'm almost certain one came back the following summer because it perched right on the cage, right on the duck palace, as my children called it. And I had a special way of calling to it, and it flew up on a telephone wire and stood there and spent some time with me. And then it flew off. And that was the Blackie, who was the runt of the litter, who would have never survived if I hadn't made sure that he or she survived. And so that bird bonded with me a little bit more than the others. The others became progressively more wild, and all 5 of them flew south together. I think they were all 5 together one day, and the next day they were all gone. So I don't know, you know. I like to think Blackie's out there, but.
Yeah. And were they injured birds? I don't know the story, the back.
Oh, I forgot to tell you. Oh, that's the interesting part of the story. I was at a friend's house who was one of the Madison River Liars and Fly Tires Club's guys, who has one of those log mansions on the upper Madison River. And he didn't like the view of his neighbor's trailer, so he ordered 4 30 or 20-foot pine trees, spruce trees, to be planted to block his neighbor's view. So these trees were with root balls lying down in a flatbed trailer truck, and they were driven 100 miles and put up in Steve's yard. And the guy says, oh, by the way, it looks like you got a nest of baby birds in there. So there was a nest of baby blackbirds. And Steve and other people are calling me inside, hey, we got to sing happy birthday to this little girl. And I'm thinking, no, I got to save those birds. So I crammed worms down their throat and shut them up for the night. And the next day I called the closest wild bird rescue person. Who just said, just call me Captain Marvel, a woman in her 80s up in Helena. And I described the situation. She says, honey, she told me what to do. You know, she says, honey, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but those are not bluebirds. Those are blackbirds. And I thought, well, maybe, you know, she'd take care of them. That's what she does. She says, honey, that's what they all think. That's what you all think. In other words, you're the bird rescuer, and she's going to coach you through it. And so she sort of coached me through it. And that's how I got my birds.
All right. And then I've heard of didn't one of the Rockefeller trees recently have a nest of owls in it or something? I heard.
That were accidentally planted?
No, just the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree had
owls in it? I didn't know
just
that.
One owl, I guess. Thank you. One owl. I think it was this past year even. All right. And one final question from Gail. And she said, since you like to tell stories, would you be able to share the story of the photo of the Beatles on top of your hutch in your background? Looks like you have a picture of the Beatles on the top of your hutch. I don't know.
I do? Oh, I guess they can see that, yeah.
Yeah,
well,
I can.
By the way, the bison painting, it's a wonderful oil painting that my son did.
Oh, I was admiring that earlier.
Well, my wife is an old hippie, and she actually saw the Beatles twice. First at the Cal Palace in San Francisco, and later she saw their very, very final public concert, which was at Candlestick Park. So she was a huge Beatles fan and actually saw the Beatles. Not too many people can say that. And so Indian friend of ours did that painting of the Beatles dressed up as the Beatles, you know, and in Butte when we saw it, and Gail bought it. And she's just now getting around to getting it framed. So that's the story. She's an old Beatles fan. Well, I am too, but I never saw them.
Yeah. And Jody says she did not know that, but it doesn't surprise her.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think. Oh, and then just a quick follow-up. I saw that Lisa had the question, and I know the answer to this, so I will answer it just as the librarian in the conversation. She asked, for those who cannot read books, are audiobooks available? And yes, they are. Our library, yeah, we have audiobooks books on
Rick
CD.
Holmes, who was a Broadway actor,
yeah,
narrated all my books, and it was a very nice man and something I really enjoyed doing with him. Do you have an audio version of the latest book?
I haven't been able to find it yet, honestly.
No, I think it's an Audible. I think it's only Audible.
That's what I was scared of, because I
think it's on recorded books, and I think that's a result of the COVID stuff they were telling me.
I wasn't sure either, but we do have the others all on audio from recorded books. And say the name of the narrator again.
Rick Holmes. He's an actor.
Okay.
He's in that TV series Dead to Me on Netflix. The TV series Atlanta. I mean, he's had parts in them. He's a working actor. He does a little bit of movies, does a little bit of television pilots, a little bit of series work, but is mainly a Broadway actor until a few years ago. And it'd be great because he'd call me to, you know, he'd read through 70 pages he was going to do the next day to read, and he'd call me with questions, and he's very insightful, and sometimes he'd catch a mistake. And he'd usually do that while he was on the subway, or he was playing the evil father in Matilda or whatever, the Roald Dahl book, and he was off stage for 21 minutes. And so those 21 minutes, that's when he'd talk to me to get the pronunciations right, you know. And he'd say, oh, that's my cue. I got to run back on stage. And he'd literally run back on stage. He was such an old hand at it. But I always really enjoyed that part. Was for 5 or 6 days, I'd get to work with Rick.
Yeah, that was a really good question. I
Yeah,
didn't think to mention it, but you're right. They are available in audio. And
yeah.
it sounds like the most recent one is just available via Audible, which is
I believe
Amazon's.
so. I believe so.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find it to buy for the library, so we'll keep looking and I'll keep an eye out for it. But Keith, thank you so much for chatting with me and answering all of our questions. I do think we answered everything that came in. I'll just do one final quick check.
Good. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. And like I said, everybody who attended today, local or not, you provided your email address. So if you're here, you'll be entered to win the drawings. I mean, some of them are local only, like restaurant gift cards. You're probably not going to want me to send to Arkansas, but you never know. So you're all eligible for attending tonight's event. And just a quick thank you again to Kenyon Noble Lumber and Hardware. They are sponsoring this series, and we're very grateful for their support. And to Keith for tying the fly and the hat. And Keith is going to come into the library probably mid-April to sign all of the copies of the books that we purchased for this series.
Sign them and put
bookmarks
in them and pictures and.
Yeah. So those will be part of the giveaway as well. We'll be doing drawings for those, and we have probably 50 that we'll give away, and then we're going to create a book kit with the remaining 10 or so. So keep an eye on your email, and you might get an email from the same email you probably saw to register for the Zoom. bcl@belgradelibrary.org is our contact information. And thank you so much. We'll have this up on YouTube probably later next week. And I don't know what KGVM's plans are, but keep an eye on their website for the audio archive. So
when you have it on YouTube, will you let me know?
Absolutely.
Link, and I'll put it up for people to see.
That would be great. Yeah, thanks, Keith. Yeah, I'll definitely send you the email. And thanks everybody for attending. You'll get a survey after I end the meeting, but otherwise, thanks for your time, Keith. It's been great to chat. I feel like I learned a lot. Yeah.
It's nice to have a few people there I know, like Lisa.
Yeah, and actually, just so I think you mentioned Mark earlier. I think Mark is here too. What was his last name?
Mark Paddock.
Oh, never mind. Different Mark. But
different Mark.
Yeah. But yeah. So everybody, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.